Lindsay Manufacturing has been a name in the residential central vacuum market for almost as long as there has been a residential central vacuum market. And since I've amassed kind of a little assortment here of their products and arranged them in roughly chronological order, I thought I'd make this little video, part for historical interest and partly to benefit the owner of one of these systems. So starting in the late 1950s, early 60s, you had machines that looked like this. This one is from 1963. It's a model P245 and the serial number 6311066. I'm assuming means the 66th machine made in the 11th month, perhaps week, of 1963. And this machine is unique because the separation design is different from the other ones that you'll see here. And it's a very, very interesting system. So the motor, unlike all of these where they bought a pre-assembled motor and fan package and plopped it in there like every other central vacuum maker has done in the last 70 years, in this case they bought the motor from Robbins and Myers and constructed their own fan system, two-stage big impellers made of thick sheet aluminum actually, and then attached to the bottom of that shaft underneath the impellers was a slinger disc, a separator of sorts, and the idea was that that would fling the dust and dirt away from the intake and it would be forced to the bottom of the bucket. Filterless cyclonic separation of a style that we don't see anymore. Well, the problem was this was probably really good at separating homogeneous material. Like if I were just to vacuum up dirt, straight dirt, nothing but, then it would probably work. But if I'm sucking up dog hair and little bits of Kleenexes and et cetera, shredded paper, a lot of that stuff is light enough that it's not going to get thrown away from the intake. It's going to get sucked up into the impellers, and this is going to stop working in short order. So this was kind of a short-lived design, but I applaud the innovation. You know, this was a period of time where they were still figuring things out from scratch with really very little prior art to go from. And the other thing was there were some patents on competing technologies that they had to not violate when they were making their system. One of the other interesting components of these early systems was, first of all, they were often installed with metal tubing and fittings. This is an aluminum elbow and oftentimes aluminum or steel piping. And the inlets, in this case, this system was installed with inlets that look like this, and I think these are very handsome, very nice looking indeed. And these turned on when you inserted the hose. This was not one of the manufacturers that required you to push a button or had the inlet turn on when you opened it. The way this worked was kind of similar to an automotive electrical system where the ground, or one conductor, was that metallic tubing and fittings and the brass neck of the inlet. And your positive conductor, let's say, you really only needed one wire. This went to a little pin jack, as they call it. You can see there that little button inside. And the metal hose end would just complete a circuit between that wire and the housing. Well, the problem was, I think that it probably was an unreliable signaling method. And of course, then once you start getting plastic tubing and fittings, that won't work at all. So subsequent versions of that inlet, whether they were the diamond shaped or rectangular like this one, they would have had a second wire soldered to the brass neck, and then you have your traditional two-wire control system. So let's see, so that's 60s. It was sold as Vacu-Maid, made by Lindsay Manufacturing of Ponca City, Oklahoma. Interestingly enough, Ponca City, Oklahoma is home to a very early central vacuum also, the Marland Grand House, a very large mansion built in the 19-teens, has the remains of an Arco-Wand system in it. Let's see, so Vacu-Maid was frequently doing some private label work also. This machine, which I've covered in a different video, is a Nautilus Whirlaway, but it was made by Lindsay Manufacturing, and in fact you can see that here on the control gear. This one has its control transformer and relay mounted externally, unlike most of these other ones where it's inside. So we talked about that cyclonic separation, how it ended up not working that well. This one has an inverted bag filter. Nautilus specified that's what they wanted. This was not a Vacu-Maid design that they really marketed. They were all about cyclonic filterless. So the next iteration, the one that they stuck with for decades and continue to make to this day after the whirling separator deal, just involved tangential intake. This is not on a tangent, but there's an elbow inside that makes it kind of quasi-tangential. And cones or baffles, and then a screen, a guard screen up inside, and that will stop most of your heavier dirt from getting up into the motor, stop it from damaging the motor, and generally give you sustained cleaning performance, at least until that screen clogs. That's an important point, because if you have one of these and you just have it in your house and you've been vacuuming with it, well, you, I'm sure, know to take this bucket off and empty it, but it's not obvious that you have to clean that screen. And in fact, the screen is way up inside the thing, very difficult to get to. So if you have one of these systems and the performance is, kind of wimpy, check that screen. This is not a job for you to do when you're dressed up about to go out to dinner, by the way. So up inside there, that's the typical condition of that screen after years of use and much deferred maintenance. That needs to be cleaned off. Unfortunately, it cannot be removed. But there are a couple of things you can do with this machine. The first is to take like a floor machine pad or that kind of a coarse mesh filter, round, and after you've cleaned that screen, stick that up in there. Stick the filter up in the vacuum, to be very specific. And then next time it's dirty, you can take that out and clean it and put it back in. That'll also give you finer filtration. It'll reduce the amount of dirt and debris that go up through the screen into the impellers, because that is a failure mode on these machines. The motors will oftentimes get full of debris in the impellers and stop sucking before they actually burn out. That's, to me, I consider that a premature failure. So that's one way to prevent it. The other way is to, you can actually take this cone out and see that elbow, that diverter elbow that I was talking about? You can pop that off. Sometimes it takes some doing, but you can take that off and put on like a 45 facing down, and you can literally take a central vacuum disposable filter bag and stick that on the neck of that elbow, and that'll make your bagless central vacuum into a bagged central vacuum, not only making it much cleaner to empty, but also extending its life by reducing drastically the amount of dust that goes up through the motor and out the exhaust. Speaking of exhaust, any machine that doesn't have a filter, or really only has one layer of filtration even, should be vented to the outside of the house. Any of these machines where you see like a plume of dust coming out the exhaust of the thing, that needs to have its exhaust vented to the outside like a clothes dryer. Otherwise, it's a very dirty situation indeed, wherever this is installed. Lindsay innovated some inlet designs of their own, even after the diamond flat kind that I showed you there. This is one of their neat utility inlets. It's cast aluminum. This has a micro switch. So after they gave up on the unreliable pin jack technology shown here, they were big believers in just having a little micro switch and a little ball bearing on the inside of the neck, just like that, that is pushed in by the end of the hose, turning the system on. So this is a micro switch utility inlet. This is a micro switch wall inlet, which is upside down in this case. Whoops. And it's also missing its gasket. So that's another thing. Any central vacuum system is a closed system. It needs to not have air leaks in order to be effective. If you have inlets with missing or damaged gaskets, like that hiss when you're vacuuming somewhere else, that's robbing your performance. That needs to be addressed. Otherwise, you're vacuuming, and a big portion of your performance is just getting wasted. So here's the in-wall assembly, the bracket that mounts to the stud, the bushing, and the 90-degree elbow. This is a really tight turn, probably not only to make it easy to fit it into narrow partition walls, but also this serves as an effective stop for larger debris. Think of somebody vacuuming up a pencil or something. It could make its way down the hose, but it's not going to go past this elbow. And anything that does make it past this really tight turn can go through the longer turns elsewhere in the system, which is a good design. Around the same time Lindsay introduced the single-piece cyclonic unit, they also introduced the two-piece cyclonic unit. And that I have an example of right here. It's this can, which forms the separator, and this would be where the piping from the inlets in the house connect. And then this can is the motor unit. They made some with 2 motors. This is a single motor. You can always tell the single motor ones have an intake on the bottom and exhaust on the right. The dual motor ones have an intake on the side and exhausts on the sides also. One exhaust points this way, one exhaust points that way. So you're going to have 3 pipes connected to a dual motor unit instead of 2. There's a couple of benefits. These I always thought were kind of neat. You could mount the motor remotely and mount the dirt canister, the separator, where it's easy to empty. These are super common in hair salons and veterinary offices. The other benefit was that screen, which is so tough to clean when it's up inside the unit. Well, on these, they actually took and they inverted the screen, and they made the dirty side of it face up instead of facing down, and that is right under this lid. So you can take the lid off, and you can clean the screen, and then empty the bucket. Now, this is not a flawless design, because oftentimes dirt that would hit the screen and then maybe some of it would fall back off thanks to gravity when the vacuum wasn't running. Now that's just here. It's just sitting here. So even though they advertised this setup as being great for pet owners will find gobs, just masses of pet hair around this screen long before the bucket is empty. And the other thing is, if you think about gravity moving things downward, at this point, this is motor intake, right? So you're going to get a lot of debris that works its way down through the screen and then gets pulled into the motor intake, subjecting these motors to a lot of debris that they don't need to be subjected to. And in fact, if you look closely, you can see that the chunks of dirt that are in here, and those are just on their way to get sucked into the impellers, which, the impellers on these motors are not terribly tolerant of that kind of debris. This is going at 20,000 RPM. The clearances are 1/8 of an inch or less. It doesn't take much to really foul the performance, degrade the airflow, and eventually throw the motor off balance and ruin the bearings, and the thing will sound like a siren. So, something to be aware of. I mentioned how common these are in veterinary applications. This one says scavenging gas, and so originally this thing started life as a medical anesthesia evacuation pump, and then eventually it was taken out. But for a vacuum cleaning system, that was just a tangent. You can also add, one thing Lindsay gets into is some kind of weird oddball stuff that nobody else makes, and I applaud them for that. That's cool, because we need this stuff. One of them is the salon interceptor, or as we all call it, the hair bucket. And this is when you're sucking up gobs and gobs of hair, and you don't want to overwhelm or overload the primary separator that your system would ordinarily come with. So you have this larger can, it sits on the ground, it's connected with flex hose, and this usually has a coarse mesh pad filter. They call it a hog's hair filter that goes around here, and this traps all the hair and whatever else in this bucket, and the air going through here is basically clean, and then it gets separated out again, and the air going to the motor is even cleaner. So even though this is a cyclonic system, there would be a couple of filters. Those help preserve the life of the motor. That's a good thing. They make this in a 55-gallon drum version. Like if you're sucking up more hair than this thing could hold, you can get a whole drum and just let that fill up. I've run across one or two setups that have that. The other thing they make in terms of separators, since we're on that subject, is they will make interceptors that go at the inlet. So this is mounted at the machine, right? Everything that goes through here has already gone through the pipes. Excuse me. But what if you wanted to stop whatever you're picking up from going through the pipes? Let's say water, liquid, or let's say greasy debris from a restaurant. Well, then you can get a pre-inlet interceptor. And the way this works is you have a short hose that goes from this little bucket to a wall inlet connection. Let's just use this one. Hello. All right, and then your long cleaning hose that you move around with connects here. This is basically using your central system as a source of suction and fine filtration, and the bulk of the filtration or the separation is being done right here, and that avoids clogging in piping from restaurants, etc. It also lets you suck up water with a dry central vacuum. This particular separator is a wet pickup version, and you can see it has a little styrofoam float that when this gets full enough of water, blocks off the intake and prevents water from getting sucked up through the system and making a mess. The restaurant version has a screen in place of the float, very similar to this setup here. If you've ever been at a IHOP or a Denny's, when those restaurants used to be all carpeted around 1 in the morning, while you were probably not in a position to be contemplating their vacuum cleaner, but I was, and I always used to notice them hauling this out. And in fact, they had an ingenious setup for those restaurants, because what's to stop the employee from just taking the long hose, plugging it right into the wall, and forgetting about this? Well, they thought of that. They made the hose, the long cleaning hose, fit into here, but not fit into the wall inlet. And the hose that went from here to the wall was a bigger diameter. So like if you compare, let's do this one-handed. All right. So this is the industry standard inch. This is the industry standard 1.5" inlet size. This is the restaurant inlet size, and if you notice it's bigger, that means that the cleaning hose, the long hose, will not fit into this. The only thing you can plug into here is the hose that goes to that. Very smart. They made an array of wonderfully high style inlet choices over the years. This is the most common, stainless steel, rectangular, and they made some designer ones that would blend in fabulously with your 70s conversation pits and indoor swimming pools and carpeted bathrooms and whatever else. I love these. But of course, oftentimes you'll just get boring ivory. And today, ivory's out, and we have boring white. Well, in fact, I have these in my house, even though my house didn't come with a Vacu-Maid system. I like that these are metal. They're large enough to cover the paint line on the wall from the old inlets, which were ivory. And I like being able to go around, open a cover, burp the system, because I have the single pin jack kind, and whatever, you know, suck up a little piece of paper that I found on the floor. Because I have the single micro switch, right? However, they do make this style inlet, not the restaurant kind, I'm talking about the household kind, with 2 contacts. And this is a more industry standard connection today. I'm jumping around a lot, I apologize. So your single micro switch, it just turns on when you stick the hose in and it turns off when you pull the hose out. Simple, functional. But a lot of times today we want a hose that allows you to turn the vacuum off and on from the end of the hose. So Lindsay offers inlets that are the same size, but they have 2 contacts, and that allows you to use this with an industry standard on-off hose. They also made, they don't make any longer, but about 20 years ago they made their own hose handle, which the hose carcass is just a Plastiflex electric hose, nothing special there, just a good hose. But this is a proprietary Vacu-Maid handle. It's big, but it's not uncomfortable to use. What I think is interesting about this is you have the switch for the main unit, the system, and then you have another little switch back here for the power head. Very unique. If you should need to replace this hose, you can get an industry standard hose now that still fits your wall inlets, fits your tools, but the switch is a single switch that goes left and right, and in the center is off. Vacu-Maid for years was big on a couple of attachments. One was the combination floor and rug tool. They used to kind of talk against having a power brush, the need for a power brush. They said you could get your carpets clean with the great suction of the central system and just a suction nozzle, no rotating brushes, which they said would potentially cause damage to the carpet. So they would give you this tool. You would use it like this for the rugs, and then you would step on this and pop the brushes out and use it like that for the floors, where only the brush is supposed to be touching the floors. Now I'm in love with the convenience of this one tool to do both surfaces, instead of having to swap tools all the time when you're going from rugs to floors to rugs to floors. The problem is I never thought this did an exceptionally good job on the rugs or on the floors. Not my favorite. The other thing that I always see with Vacu-Maid systems is the vibrating rubber mattress tool, or the tool, because that's what it sounds like. Let me see if I can, this might actually, let me hook it up to, and that's that. So that was supposed to vibrate the dust out of your mattresses and be more effective than just using the upholstery tool. So many Vacu-Maid systems traditionally came with this tool, and I don't know, is it a gimmick? Is it effective? Have I been missing the boat? Maybe I should try this. I don't know what you're doing this weekend. I'm going to vacuum my mattress. I have a really full life. Vacu-Maid's sister brand has been Astrovac. Astrovac, as you can see, has been used on inverted bag filter systems that are not cyclonic. This one just has a cloth filter. It's like a beam. But they've also been used on cyclonic systems. So you could get a unit that's exactly like this one that just said Astrovac on it. That was just a different brand, kind of like, Chevy and GMC trucks. This particular unit incorporates another innovation from Lindsay Manufacturing, which is the air channel. This metal stamped piece that's riveted in on the side of the can allows you to take a heavy plastic liner bag and put it in here. What would happen if you used a plastic liner without this thing is oftentimes that liner will just get sucked up and block the suction and defeat the purpose, just be not workable. This is an air equalizing channel that allows the suction to get behind the bag and keep the bag from getting sucked up, where the dirt still falls in the bag, but the suction has a path to get down there. On industrial systems, the way they do that is they'll have a separate little air line that runs along and gets plugged into the outside of the can, but this is the simple way to accomplish that same thing. Vacu-Maid, Lindsay, for years did, like I said, private labeling. There's that old Nautilus Whirlaway. Here's another one. Here's a wall vac built to wall vac specifications. So this is quite clearly a Lindsay product. In fact, it might even say. No, it doesn't say. But it's a Lindsay. Look at the latches, look at the can, look at everything. Does it say here? No. It says wall vac. But they spec'd it with a disposable bag. They spec'd it with a manual switch. And they even spec'd it to use their bracket instead of the Vacu-Maid bracket. And that was so that you could take the old wall vac unit off the wall, put this one on the wall, and not have to change the bracket, because that would take an extra 5 minutes. One of their more popular private label brands was Imperium. And this was made for Central Vacuum Stores in St. Petersburg, Florida. A company that has since closed, but they moved a lot of these things. And this one has the inverted cloth filter like the Astrovac. This one has a disposable paper filter bag, and this I kind of like. So the most popular top emptying central vacuum is the MD design. I'm a big MD fan. I have one at home. I've been selling them for 20 years. This is similar to an MD. There are some differences, but the disposable bag, as I mentioned before, does a great job of keeping the motor clean and keeping you clean as you empty the thing. One thing this lacks is an outer support bag, so this just sits in the canister, and especially the paper bags, they were susceptible to gluing themselves to the sides of the can, choking off a lot of airflow. These synthetic, like HEPA type bags, they're much better at that, so you'll get great airflow out of these for longer as the bag fills. How do I conclude this video? I've been only talking for almost 30 minutes. Geez, it's time to wrap it up. I'll thumb through my literature for your edification and viewing pleasure. I mentioned how often Vacu-Maid products have delved into the unusual and the custom, and that includes commercial systems. As you'll see here, they have, or they had, this is a 40-year-old brochure, but floor-mounted round inlets. I've actually got one of these in the sunroom. It's in the floor. Couldn't get one in the wall. And turbine units. So this is a continuous duty regenerative blower with the Vacu-Maid separator. This is a multi-stage blower with a big, huge separator. And this is what you'd see like in a hospital or a school or something like that. This would be multi-operator. And there's some specs. So we're back with the industrial inlets. There was one with a key lock, to keep people like me from messing about with their vacuum system. There's the diagram of that separator. So they call the interceptor canister, that's the restaurant one. And then the wet pickup canister in several sizes. Commercial fittings, another page of commercial units. So there's a multi-stage turbine horizontal, as is the more traditional arrangement. This one was kind of interesting because it's vertical. It's like a tripod. The motor's underneath. Different way to do it. Maybe save some space that way. They were even offering belt-driven turbines for, like if you needed a gas engine, or you had a 50-cycle motor instead of the standard 60-cycle motor that this would ship with if it wasn't a belt drive. Vacu-Maid is your quiet servant. Well, at least when it's new. I don't mean to pick on this company. As you can see, I appreciate all their innovations and the many, many, many years of industry contributions that they've had. But, every design has its pros and cons, let's say. I love these brochures for just the vintage decor. I mean, this was high style at the point when this system was being sold. I love it. Sadly, that even though I get a kick out of this, unfortunately today we are at a point where the central vacuum system is no longer a fresh, new, modern idea. There are more old systems out there than there are new systems, and one of my big jobs in life is educating people why there are some inherent benefits to the system. It should be kept or upgraded or just used as is, and it is not outmoded. In this age of stick vacuums and robo-vacs, I still use a central vacuum exclusively to clean my home. And I have no use for a stick vacuum or a robo-vac, and my central vacuum is almost as old as I am. There we go. Here's an Astrovac brochure. Very 80s. Do love that copper color. And this one says, the world's most respected vacuum system. And there's the performance graphs of their different, so we've got the unrestricted cyclonic unit, and we've got some different examples. Interestingly enough, they made units that had all these different filtration styles, so even though they obviously preferred and recommended the cyclonic, despite its pros and cons, they made a range of them. If you wanted a bag unit, you could get one. If you wanted a foam filter unit, you could get one. And this was a big dealer in the Chicago area. They've been closed for years. They actually went to Beam after they sold Vacu-Maid for a long time. There we go. There's that vibrating upholstery tool. I always thought this one was cool. Very, very wordy. You won't get anybody to read all this today. Shag rug attachments. There's a operating manual. So oftentimes, like if I upgrade somebody's system, replace it with a new one, they'll just hand me the old folder of all the literature. And that's oftentimes how I add to my collection. So here's a dual motor unit. That's what I was talking about. Side intake and then side exhaust. P350. And the Medivac for general cleaning, grooming, surgical prep, and treatment. Lots of central vacs in veterinary hospitals. Lots of them are Vacu-Maids. I cannot imagine having a vet center without a central vacuum. And this is late enough. Gosh, this is probably close to 20 years old now, but they're already offering Idahos, which we have used successfully in commercial applications, though the vast majority of the Idahos installs we do are residential. Scavenging and aspiration. So this is basically just one of their regular motor pods, but it's adapted to the smaller little, I think that's for anesthesia recovery, right? So the anesthesia gas doesn't just go out into the room. And medical suction with separators. Obviously you're not sucking up the medical fluids through the piping. It just gets caught right there. You're just using it as a source of suction. But warm air dryer, cage dryer. So they had a central dryer system. That I have not seen in the field. Anyway, this video is 34 minutes and 48 seconds long. I applaud anybody who's still watching at this point. I know I'm wordy, and I know that some of this video is only going to be interesting to a very, very select population, let's say. So I appreciate all of you who've watched it to this point. If I can answer any questions or help you with your Vacu-Maid system, please drop a comment or reach out to us via email. Thank you for watching. Happy vacuuming.